got one voice. What's the song going? She uses it well. see, talk to me. Talk to me. Yeah. It's not. You know how it seems a little low.
So is there
Right. That's right in line with the, can you give me another white balance? There he is. All right. Still get the White House? No. From time to time. Yeah, me too. Not much except really fun news coming in. No. Very true. here on this side? Is that you? Just throw something at me. You know the rules.
Three, four, five, 6, 7, 8, 10. Test, test. We're good on everybody. Sound good? Testing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. This is McConnell, Schumer, and other leaders post policy lunch. Testing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Test, test, test.
hours have been kind of hectic. Past 2 hours have been pretty hectic. closer in that's more to the southeast. Yeah, so we need some more aviators. Mason Collins. I know I played all these people. I even ref many a soccer game in secondary high school. Dakota Thunder. Travis Stevens. Yes, that's right. Well, that's they have not. They're the first team since the 1939 Eagles to not score a touchdown in their first two. They're bad. Then there's the New York Giants. Who I thought, and it's a long season. I mean, I think the Giants have actually I don't know about the Giants have won 2 Super Thought I felt a disturbance in the force. Good to see you. We'll talk. That reminds me, I have a question for you. What age is it? 14? 12? 13? I think the trick is if we get real quiet, we can actually hear what they're saying immediately. Now that would be great, right? We all get real quiet and then we can hear what they're talking about. Then we got some real news. bigger than we think. Oh well, anything that was. Yeah. But there were everything packed in there. This is big. It's not managed. And then there was a whole. came out through there. You could
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I expect you already know that we spent lunch talking about Graham Cassidy. Lots of interest in the bill that Senator Cassidy and Senator Graham have been working on, and I've asked them to join us today and lead off. So have at it, guys.
Well, number one, I've never felt better about where we're at. It's pretty well clear to me where the country's going under Obamacare and Bernie Care. It's going into further bankruptcy. Is more decisions further away from where you live. And in 1996, we block granted money for welfare reform, and it worked like a charm. We put governors in charge of the program. We held them accountable. So here's the choice for America: socialism or federalism when it comes to your health care. 4 states get 40% of the money under Obamacare: New York, California, Massachusetts, and Maryland. They represent 20% of the population. Our goal is by 2026 to make sure that every patient in every state gets the same contribution, roughly, from the federal government, and allow people in your states to make decisions that would have been made in Washington. The most beneficial aspect of this bill is as follows. If you don't like Obamacare, who do you complain to? You can complain to me, but I sure as hell don't run it. If I can get South Carolina in charge of this money that would have been spent in Washington by a bureaucrat who's unelected, I promise every South Carolinian the following: if you don't like your health care, somebody will listen to you. It's your governor and your state house representative. You can go to the state house representative who most likely goes to the same hospital you do. You can go to your governor who will listen to you because they care about your vote, if nothing else. I'm trying to take the money and power in Washington and send it back closer to the patient. If you believe government closer to the people is the best government, why not health care? And finally, we know how this movie ends if we don't change. We're going to have a single-payer health care system in this country that's going to bust the budget, and we're going to start rationing care like you've never seen. Obamacare is failing for a reason. It's a bad idea. State control of health care will work because the people in charge will be accountable to you, unlike Obamacare, where the person in charge could give a damn of what you think.
For 25 years, I treated patients in Louisiana's charity hospital system. It's been my life's work to try and bring health care and coverage to those who do not have. So when a fellow back home named Moon Griffon with a special needs child tells me that he's paying over $40,000 a year in premiums, plus a $5,000 deductible and more money on top of that, we know that the system is failing. I've spoken of the Jimmy Kimmel test, where those who had need would have their needs addressed. His family, Moon Griffon, it's almost beyond their reach. He has a job, doesn't get a subsidy, and therefore cannot afford his insurance coverage. That's not the way it should be. What we attempt to do is to take all the dollars that are here in Washington, D.C., doled out if the state jumps through a hoop, and we return it down to the states for the states to do that which is best for that state. If you're in a state which has not expanded Medicaid, you're going to do great. And all those lower-income Texans, Floridians, Mainers, Virginians, Missourians will have dollars in their state to help them get health insurance that they currently do not have. If you're a state which has expanded Medicaid, we do our best to hold you harmless. We don't want to hurt folks. We run it through the CHIP program. I hear no one complain about the CHIP program. The CHIP program is something on a bipartisan basis, has been recognized to be an effective way to provide access to quality care to those in need. We take it through the CHIP program. We continue patient protections. Whatever waiver a state wishes to have, they must ensure the Secretary that they continue to provide adequate and affordable coverage for those with pre-existing conditions. That is our backstop. We preserve mental health parity, but ultimately we give the dollars to the state for the state to be inventive. We can look at the things that states have done over the last 10 years, some of which were squashed by Obamacare. In Maine, their invisible high-risk pool, which Obamacare put out of business, lowered premiums by 20%, is now seen as the policy to go forward. In Indiana, where they pre-funded health savings accounts so lower-income Hoosiers could be empowered to purchase their own services, they found that costs went down and outcomes improved. We give it to the states. I'll finish how I started. I'm a doctor for 25 years, caring for those who didn't have coverage. It is my goal to continue to bring them coverage. I think that Graham Cassidy, Heller Johnson does a far better job for this than status quo. Thank you.
Any questions on the substance? I'd like for Senator Cassidy and Senator Graham to handle.
Senator Graham, can you talk and/or Senator Cassidy? You said you've never been in a better state with this before. You know that almost any repeal replace plan, however it's packaged, is going to get anywhere between 46, 47 Republican yeses. We might be a little higher than that now, but that's not that much better. Why is that different than July when the math fundamentally, to this moment, hasn't changed?
Well, at the end of the day, we need 50 votes, and if you're a Republican, chances are you believe in federalism, because if you don't, you're probably not a Republican. So the last effort to repeal and replace Obamacare was better than Obamacare, but it did not embrace the concept that Bill is talking about. So I believe that most Republicans like the idea of state-controlled health care versus Washington, D.C. controlled health care. Employer assessments are going out next month. By the end of 2017, over 90,000 businesses will get a notice from the federal government under Obamacare that's $4.8 billion. A lot of Republicans would like to stop that from happening, and the best way to do that is to repeal the employer mandate, individual mandate nationally. States can reimpose it. So we've come upon an idea that is uniquely Republican, but over time has proved to work in other areas like welfare reform. So I would hate to be the Democrat that voted against more money for my state and more power and keep the status quo. So if you're a Democrat, let's say in Missouri, you're going to get far more money under this proposal than Obamacare, and your state would have more control over the money. To reject that money and that control means you believe that somebody in Washington cares more about people in Missouri than people in Missouri. You believe it's okay to help California, New York, Maryland, and Massachusetts more than Missouri. That's just what a Democrat would have to face. if they voted no. If you're a Republican and you vote against federalism, you got to explain to people back home why Washington knows better, and almost every state except the 4 I've described do very well under this new approach to taking the money out of Washington. So I think the idea is more powerful. I think the substance is much more fair. And at the end of the day, I really believe we're going to get 50 Republican votes, and I make a prediction. There are going to be a lot of Democrats struggling with a no vote because at least 8 of them, their states do far better than Obamacare in terms of funding, and they have more control over the money, and that's going to be a hard no.
Is it not reckless to pass such a monumental bill without the CBO's full appraisal on its impact?
The CBOs told us that they'll have a score for us. The coverage that'll be on the cash aspect of it, the financial aspect of it, so we'll have a chance to look at that.
When is the bill coming to the floor?
Well, you all understand that we would have to deal with this before September the 30th. And so that's the answer. You know, we'll have to deal with it because the vehicle expires at the end of the month.
You will bring this bill to the floor, to be clear?
If we were going to go forward, we would have to act before September 30th.
You haven't decided whether you will.
Well, we are in the process of discussing all of this. Everybody knows that the opportunity expires at the end of the month.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Here's the test for Republicans. Did we work as hard to repeal Obamacare as they did to pass it? Mitch McConnell and the leadership has done everything we've asked and then some. I spoke to Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, and says, I like it, you send it to the House, it's going to pass. Every Republican out there believes that this is a fundamental reason we're in charge, that Democrats have lost a lot of seats backing a bad idea, and we've been the biggest political beneficiary of Obamacare, and we want to try to make patients the beneficiary of our idea. So at the end of the day, will we try again? I would argue that yes, we should, because I do not want to go back to South Carolina and say that I did everything I could to repeal Obamacare and not believe it in my heart. So Senator McConnell is doing everything he can. Paul Ryan told me to my face, if you pass it, we pass it.
Leader McConnell, this plan has been out there for a couple of months. How do you convince Americans that you truly think that this would lead to better health care and it's not just a last-ditch attempt to do something before the deadline?
Well, I think you've heard the arguments here from Senator Graham and Senator Cassidy. It is better than the status quo by far, and I think that's an argument we're all comfortable with making.
Limited time left in the fiscal year, limited time left in the calendar year. How concerned are you about time in terms of getting everything you want to get done this year?
I think we'll be fine. Yeah. As you know, the next big priority is tax reform, and I think we're just fine.
Senator Clark, there was an allusion made, and this would go to Senator Graham too. Senator Graham's raised a lot of concerns early on in the process about how this was working, how you were moving through. One of your colleagues and good friends has made this kind of the basis of a rather important vote in July. Given the compressed timetable, do you feel like you will adequately address Senator McCain's concerns?
We have a hearing scheduled Monday in Finance. We had one vote on the NDA, the defense bill. Why? Because Democrats objected to Tom Cotton's amendment. My friends on the other side love process when it advantages them. So there will be a public hearing, what John's been asking for. You can have different opinions about the quality of this bill. At the end of the day, this is the only process left available to stop a march towards socialism. We have between now and the end of the month to have a vote and a debate about whether this is better than the status quo. My friends on the other side are never going to agree to a bipartisan proposal that does anything other than prop up Obamacare. I've talked to the president 5 times in the last 2 days. He is focused like a laser. He has told me he's not going to throw good money after bad. He's very excited about this state-centric health care system. And all I can tell you is that The process left to us is that the Democratic Party is never going to give us anything that fundamentally changes Obamacare. We've had weeks of talking, and the only time they've gotten serious is when they're afraid that my bill may pass. And now they're coming to me, what about this and what about that? Here's what the Speaker of the House told me. I will not bring up a bill for a vote in the House that props up Obamacare, because that is not why I came here, and that is not what our majority wants to do. And the President of the United States is committed to repealing and replacing this bill, not propping it up.
Senator, on the...
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, wait, wait, wait. Or they're debating if they should be on the floor. How about the residents?
Hey, Rick.
Okay, I'm proud to be joined by my colleagues. Hey, folks, take it somewhere else. Okay, I'm proud to be joined by my colleagues, Senator Durbin, Senator Wyden, Senator Stabenow, to talk about what's going on with health care. First, we heard a lot of talk about the states and governors. Just released was a letter, 10 governors, 5 Democrat, 5 Republican, opposed to Trump Care 2, the so-called Graham-Cassidy bill, and more in favor of a bipartisan negotiation such as that Senator Alexander and Senator Murray are going forward with. Second, I just heard our Republican colleagues speak. There was a word missing: people, patients, care, all this stuff, Democrat, Republican, governors, Washington. How about how this affects people? Millions will lose coverage, no guarantee of pre-existing condition, and an end to Medicaid as we know it. Tens of millions of people could well lose coverage. People who desperately need essential services would lose it. Our Republican colleagues don't seem to care about how this affects the average American. That's why Trump Care, the previous Trump Care bills were so unpopular. That's why this bill is so unpopular. And that's why, despite all their efforts, they're struggling, because their own senators know that the public dislikes this bill. The latest version of Trump Care may live under a new name, Graham Cassidy, but no matter how many ways they try to dress it up, they try to hide it, it's even more dangerous and more reckless than the previous bill that was defeated. Simply put, Trump Care is a sham. They're crafting it in the dark of night. To say one hearing on one day without a CBO score and only 2 witnesses against the bill, that's a hearing, that's a full airing of the bill? Come on. They're ashamed of this bill. They're afraid to find out what it actually does. And so we get another bill in the dark of night. So the process is awful. Our Republican colleagues, you know, we've heard justice being blind. Our Republican colleagues should be walking around with blindfolds because they don't want to see what's in the bill they're being forced to vote for. With all the cuts to people, with all its unpopularity, with all the basic meanness in this bill. They don't want to go home and tell a mom who learns her daughter or son has cancer that an insurance company can make insurance unaffordable for them. No, they don't want that. They don't want to tell a middle-class family in the suburbs that mom or dad in the nursing home may no longer get coverage. They don't want to tell a 23-year-old young man who desperately needs opioid treatment that it may go away. This isn't simply making the decisions at the states. They make the cuts here in Washington that hurt average people and then tell the states to figure out who to cut. This is not a neutral bill that simply devolves power to the states. It's a bill to end Medicaid as we know it and let the governors do the dirty work. That is why 10 governors from the states of Colorado, Ohio, Alaska, Montana, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Louisiana, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Vermont, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, have said, don't do Trump Care 2, don't do Graham Cassidy. And just on the substance, according to the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities, it'll result in about $700 billion in cuts to health care by 2027. It would cause millions to lose coverage, millions. It would radically restructure and deeply cut Medicaid. It would bring us back to the days when insurance companies could discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. It would get rid of the consumer protections that gives Americans access to maternity care, substance abuse, prescription drugs. And it would throw the individual markets into chaos, resulting in 15 million people losing coverage. If they let the CBO do its work, if CBO weren't pressured to put out something that's just a few lines, this would all be told by CBO. And how do we know? Because similar bills in the past have been scored by CBO with similar provisions. They're afraid. They are afraid that the public will hate this bill. So they're trying to rush it through in the dark of night. We want, above all, a bill that protects average Americans, not slashes the health care they need. Whether the governor or Washington should try to do that, it's wrong. We want to work in a bipartisan process to make things better. We want the House, the President, Republican leadership to stop pressuring those who want to come up with a bipartisan solution to refrain from doing it. We can make this work in a bipartisan way, and the final thing I'd say is this. We have seen some very, very hopeful sprouts of bipartisanship in the last month. Going back to this Trump Care 2, Graham Cassidy would shut down that bipartisanship that America yearns for. I'm going to call on Senator Stabenow because she has to go to a hearing.
Well, thank you very much to all my colleagues, and thank you to everybody who has now re-engaged to email, to call, to be involved in this effort one more time to pass a form of Trump Care, which is actually worse than the last ones. As Senator Schumer said, we don't have and we won't have a full CBO score for weeks, but most of the provisions have been scored in different ways. So we know really what is coming. And we do know that it's disastrous for the people of Michigan, for people across the country, and certainly it's disastrous when we talk about the loss of essential, basic health care provisions for people. Essentially, it would let states give insurance companies, because this is who we're really talking about making the decisions here, insurance companies a bright green light to put profits before patients. And when does health care stop being health care? Is it health care if it doesn't cover prescription drugs? Is it health insurance if it doesn't cover maternity care? Is it health insurance if it doesn't cover emergency rooms? Is it health insurance if it doesn't cover people that have pre-existing conditions? And is it health insurance if it doesn't cover mental health or substance abuse treatment in the middle of an opioid epidemic? I want to remind Republicans that health care isn't political, it's personal. The way they were just talking about it, standing right here, was very political. And for all of us, for our families, and for the people in this country, it is very personal. When a young cancer patient can't afford the medications that keeps her alive because her insurance won't cover it, it's personal. When a mechanic who realizes his lifetime dream of owning his own shop has to pay more for insurance because he hurt his back a few years ago, that's very personal. And when a woman has to pay more for her health insurance just because she's a woman, that is personal. And you know what? I take it personally. People of Michigan take it personally. All of my colleagues take it personally. And that's why we will fight this in every way possible on behalf of the people we represent.
Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chuck. We were watching in the other room when the Republicans gave their press conference. It was interesting. One of the sponsors of this legislation got up and said, this is really about the great national debate between socialism and states' rights. Really? It's not about the great national debate over socialism and states' rights. It's about basic health care for the families of America. And if this is such a hot deal for governors all across America, how do you explain 5 Republican governors, like the governor of Alaska and the governor of Nevada, coming out publicly against this notion of states' rights? Why are they turning their back on an opportunity to receive this money and make the decision locally and be popular for votes, as one of these senators said? Because they can count. And when they count, they realize there's not enough money under this plan coming from Washington to sustain health care in their states and to keep up with the cost of health care in the future. They're realists. They understand it full well. It isn't a question between socialism and states' rights. It's a question about whether or not we're going to provide basic care. I don't see a lot of people across America complaining about Social Security because it's a Washington program. The heck they complain about it. They realize it's liberated them in their senior years for a good life. And the same thing's true for Medicare. And the second issue I want to raise was one that was raised by the other sponsor of this legislation, the Jimmy Kimmel test. Remember when he referred to that? You know what that's all about. This gentleman, who's well known on late night TV as a comedian, had a tough time. His baby was born with a serious problem. And he raised a question on his TV show. What's going to happen to families like mine under all this talk about the new Trump Care? Well, I can tell you under this Trump Care version, it's not a good outcome. First off, if that family happens to be under Medicaid, there's a serious question as to whether there's enough coverage. Half the babies born in Illinois are covered by Medicaid. Their moms are covered by Medicaid on prenatal care. You want a healthy baby? You want a healthy mom too. And when you cut back on Medicaid, as this bill does, you lessen that opportunity. And once that baby is born, once that family has a child with a pre-existing condition, under this Trump Care bill, it will haunt them the rest of their lives when they try to buy health insurance. That is one thing that we stood up for on Affordable Care Act and said we're not going to give in on this at all. We don't want people discriminated against because they have a member of their family who was born with a birth defect, or because someone has survived cancer care, or someone has diabetes in their family. They walk away from it in this bill. They say that's one of the options that the insurance companies can play with when they decide what your premiums will be. Time and again, when you look at this bill, there's a real reason why they don't want the American people to take a hard look at it. The rates are going to go up for senior citizens. That's a given. That's why AARP is opposed to it. The reimbursement to hospitals is going to go down. That's why the American Hospital Association and all the state chapters oppose it. And it's not going to provide the quality care that healthcare professionals like nurses and doctors know that all of us need. This is a rallying point. Many of us thought in July this battle was over for this year at least. It's not. The battle is going to pick up in steam and pick up in importance for every family from this point forward.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. I'm just going to make a couple of additional points. My colleagues have said it very well. The first point is right after Graham-Cassidy-Heller passes, healthcare markets are going to enter a free fall. And the reason that that's the case, and I would urge you to talk to state insurance commissioners about Trump 2.0, is you would have a combination of no cost sharing plus a rollback in consumer protections so that you'll have a particularly large number of people who are frail and vulnerable. So make no mistake about what happens when Graham-Cassidy passes. You have free fall in the insurance market. The second point that I want to mention, and I do it because of the press conference, is several of the Republicans talked in the press conference how great their proposal would be for CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. You need to understand that Trump 2.0 uses CHIP as a money laundering program. And the reality is you cannot have a strong CHIP program if you decimate Medicaid. The two are that directly linked. So the idea that somehow this bill is going to be good for CHIP is just absurd. This is a bargain basement block grant. We are going to pull out all the stops to derail it. People power beat Trump Care before. We're going to be using people power to beat it again.
Well said. Questions?
Schumer, Senator Stabenow was talking about the groups re-engaging. Are you concerned the speed with which this is moving has left you guys flat-footed?
You know, people are really, a week ago no one saw, this hadn't even raised its ugly head. But now the groups are really mobilized. You will find the hospitals, the AARP, the nurses, cancer care, and all the societies that they are all mobilized. They realize this bill is even worse than the last one. So I think this weekend you're going to see huge mobilization. No, you always go first because you stand here. No, go ahead. This guy.
Earlier, in the earlier press conference, to the tough vote that this would be for senators from Missouri, obviously Senator McCaskill and others. Are you confident that this bill will not get any Democratic votes because of this?
I am.
And secondly, what are you doing?
It hurts people in every state. You can be deprived of a pre-existing insurance if you have a pre-existing condition in every state. There are dramatic cuts to Medicaid in every state. It hurts every state. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're representing your people, you don't want this bill.
I mean, Senator Graham basically laid out a campaign ad against a lot of your Democratic colleagues saying, hey, you put national interests ahead of people in your state.
I don't even get what they say. We're talking about the people. Their press conference was simply about state, national, Washington, federal. socialism, states' rights. They didn't talk about people. You know why? Because this hurts people and they know it. Let me tell you, if we're doing this because we care about people, but if the 2018 election is a referendum on Trump care, they're going to get clobbered, and they know it.
The president has indicated he'll make a decision on the Iran deal soon. As someone who voted against the Iran deal, do you think the United States should stay in the agreement?
I do. I think, look, I thought the agreement was a bad agreement, but I also said that let's see, once it passed, let's give it a little time to see if it's working or not. If Iran violates the deal, that's one thing. If they don't and do other bad things, let's not violate the deal. Let's go after them on the other bad things, ICBMs, terrorism, etc. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
By the way, unlike our Republican leadership, we're not trying to hurry to get out of here. We're happy to talk about this issue. You noticed all the...
So that said, are you concerned, though, because, as you say, this bill only raised its head a few days ago. We talked about the use of groups are going to mobilize this weekend, but because there is such a degree of uncertainty, because this has been dropped out of midair, that's why people are so nervous on your side of the aisle and why we're seeing that mobilization.
But what we have done is we've looked at what the bill does, and then we've looked at how CBO has scored previous bills with similar positions. We have very strong numbers. And if the Republicans dispute our numbers, then they should wait for a CBO score.
A follow-up on that, talking about how this came up suddenly, do you think that was the Republican strategy to let things go quiet for a while, then bring this up right before the deadline?
They have never been willing, with Trump Care 1, 2, 3, or 4, to have hearings, to have debate, to have discussion, because they know while they're being pushed by some of their hard-right benefactors who want to get rid of all of the safety nets, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they know it's unpopular. The last Trump Care bill, not even as severe as this one, fewer than 20% of Americans supported it, and a majority of Trump voters were against it. So they know that this is a very, very bad medicine, both substantively for the American people and politically for them. That's why they try to rush. That's why they try to hide it. That's why they don't want to have discussion, debate, hearings. That's why the Republican leadership was so quick to get out of here after Graham and Cassidy talked about their bill.
You had talked about the pressure coming from the House, the White House, and the Senate on the bipartisan approach. The Speaker has communicated to Leader McConnell that the talks that Senator Alexander and Senator Murray having would not produce something that the House could pass. Do you think that those talks are now stalled, or at least?
No, I spoke to Patty Murray. The offer she gave to Lamar Alexander was generous. He even said it was a good offer. So I have a lot of faith in Senator Alexander's belief in bipartisanship. I hope he won't let those partisan pressures get him off course. A Howard Baker moment would be to go forward on this, and we know how much Senator Alexander admires Howard Baker.
Follow-up, if any of you had, on issues like maybe getting rid of the debt ceiling or a cap deal that you talked about with the president?
We've been busy with a couple of other issues now, but we do intend to have discussions on those soon.
Sir, limited time left in the fiscal year, Jewish holidays coming up, limited time left in the calendar year. How concerned are you about the calendar now that we're revisiting health care reform?
Well, look, that was they're in the majority, and that was their choice. I wish they hadn't made it, but I think at least for a December agreement on a variety of issues, we'll do very well.
You suggested last week that talks on your DACA dinner deal would begin this week. What's the status of that? And just curious also what you make of the president quoting Elton John today in reference to the leader of North Korea, calling him Rocket Man.
If I were giving the president advice, I would have said avoid using Rocket Man. We know the leader of North Korea is erratic, to put it kindly. That kind of language, I think, is risky, okay? On the first issue, we've been talking a little bit, among our colleagues and to the White House, and I am still very optimistic we can get a good deal on DACA, on border security, and on no wall of any sort. Last question. Sooner the better, but this week there's been other things on the plate.
This push to repeal Obamacare comes to you, as I just mentioned, have been able to make some deals with the administration. If they go forward on this legislation, does it make it harder for Democrats to negotiate and trust what Republicans are saying?
Well, if they uproot the entire health care system and get rid of so much of the health care that people need, to do a little fix to improve it isn't going to do much good. Thank you, everybody.
You guys should go feed Dan.